My name is Harold. I am 63 years old. I have rough hands from 40 years of working in a printing factory. I wear the same brown cardigan 3 days a week because it was a gift from my late mother, and I still can't bring myself to stop wearing it. I am not a rich man. I am not a loud man. I am not a man who commands attention when he walks into a room. But I am a man who listens. And on the night of March the 14th, at a beautiful restaurant called La Maison Dorée in the city, where I have lived my entire life, I sat across from my wife and her German boss, smiled like the happiest fool in the world, and listened to every single word they said about me. Every single word. And when the moment came, when the wine was poured, when the candles flickered, when they felt completely safe, I put down my glass, looked that man straight in the eyes, and I spoke. In perfect German. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Let me tell you the whole story. Because the dinner was just the ending. The real story started much, much earlier in my own home with my own family, and with a silence that I kept for far too long. I grew up poor. Not the romantic kind of poor you see in movies. The real kind where your mother cuts her own coat to make you a jacket for winter. The kind where your father works 2 jobs and still comes home apologizing. But my father was a dignified man. He always said, Harold, a quiet man is not a weak man. A quiet man is a man who is saving his words for when they matter most. I carried those words my whole life. I married my wife, Elaine, when I was 26. She was 23, beautiful, ambitious, always reaching for something just beyond where we were. I loved that about her in the beginning, her hunger for more. I thought it meant she would push us both forward together. We had one son, Daniel. He is now 34 years old, and he is the greatest joy of my life. Daniel married a woman named Sophie 3 years ago. Sophie is smart, educated, well-dressed. She works in international business consulting. She travels often. She has opinions about everything and rarely asks for the opinions of others. But she is my son's wife, and so I treated her with the same respect I would give anyone who sat at my table. My wife Elaine went back to work when Daniel was a teenager. Over the years, she climbed in her company, a European import and logistics firm. And about 2 years ago, she started working very closely with a man named Klaus Weber, her boss. A German man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, always wearing expensive cologne that arrived in the room before he did. Klaus visited our city several times a year for business. He and Elaine worked long hours together. She said he was brilliant. She said he was demanding but fair. She talked about him often, too often. But I am a quiet man. I noticed things. I kept my thoughts to myself. My son Daniel noticed too. One evening he pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Dad, are you okay? You seem distant." I smiled and handed him a mug of tea. "I'm fine, son. Just tired." That was my answer for most things. Just tired, but I wasn't tired. I was watching. I was listening. And slowly, painfully, I was understanding things that I did not want to understand. It started small. Elaine began coming home later. She stopped asking about my day. She used to sit with me after dinner, and we would watch old films. That was our thing, our quiet ritual. But that stopped. She was always on her laptop, always on calls, always too exhausted to sit beside me. She changed the way she dressed. She bought new perfume. She went to the salon more often. I told her she looked beautiful. She barely heard me. Then Klaus began visiting more frequently. He came to a company dinner that spouses were invited to, and I attended with Elaine. I shook Klaus's hand, smiled, made small talk. He spoke to me the way people speak to someone they consider completely unimportant. Polite on the surface, but his eyes were already past me before the handshake was done. He spoke English to me with a thick German accent, keeping things brief. He spoke to Elaine differently, with attention, with warmth. They laughed together at things I wasn't part of. They finished each other's sentences about work I didn't understand. I smiled and ate my dinner. Now here is something nobody in my family knew about me. Something I had never announced, never shown off, never used as a reason to feel superior. 40 years ago, when I was a young man working at a small printing firm, I was sent on an 18-month work exchange program to Munich, Germany. I was 21 years old, eager, and completely alone in a foreign country. So I did what any lonely, determined young man does. I immersed myself completely. I took evening language classes. I made German friends. I ate at local restaurants and forced myself to order only in German. I read German newspapers. I watched German television. By the time I came home, I was fluent, not tourist fluent. Not phrase, book, fluent. Fluent in the way that means you dream in the language. Fluent in the way that means you understand jokes, sarcasm, whispers, and insults. I never made a point of it back home. It never came up. Life moved on. I married Elaine, had Daniel, worked my job. German became a private thing. I read German novels sometimes, watched German films on my laptop late at night. It was mine, my quiet, secret world. And so when Klaus began visiting, and when he and Elaine sometimes slipped into German together, thinking I was simply a clueless Englishman, smiling politely at sounds he didn't understand, I heard everything, and for a long time I said nothing. 3 weeks before that night in March, Elaine came home and told me that Klaus was visiting for an important contract review. She said he had suggested taking us both to dinner, a nice dinner, she said, at La Maison Dorée. He wants to meet the families of the people he works with, she said. It will be lovely, Harold. Please wear something nice. She said, please wear something nice. The way you say it to someone who you're slightly embarrassed to bring out in public. I said, of course. She relaxed. She had expected pushback. In the days before the dinner, something changed in our house. Elaine was nervous in a way I had never seen. She paced. She changed her outfit 12 times the day before the dinner, just trying on options. She bought a new dress, dark green, elegant, the kind she wore on our anniversaries when we were younger. I watched all of this quietly, and then, 8 days before the dinner, something happened that broke my heart in a way I had not expected. I came home from the market. I do the grocery shopping every Saturday morning. I always have, and Elaine was in the kitchen on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. The front door is quiet, and she had the kitchen radio on low. She was speaking German. Not work German, personal German. Her voice was low and warm in a way it hadn't been with me in years. I stood in the hallway, my grocery bags in my hands, and I listened. She said, and I will translate exactly, he doesn't understand a word. Don't worry. He just smiles and nods. He has no idea what's happening around him. Then she laughed. Then, after a pause, she said something that stopped my heart completely. She touched her stomach. I could hear the change in her voice, the softness of it, and she said, the baby is happy. I can feel it. My wife. Pregnant. And the way she said it, was not the way a woman tells her husband she is pregnant. It was the way a woman speaks to the father of her child. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. Then I quietly went back to the front door, made a noise coming in, and walked to the kitchen with my grocery bags. Oh, you're back, Elaine said, switching to English immediately, her phone already put away. How was the market? Good, I said. I got those oranges you like, she smiled. Perfect. I put away the groceries. My hands were completely steady. My face was completely calm. Inside, I was a man standing in the ruins of his entire life, deciding very carefully what to do next. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in those days. I felt grief, deep, quiet grief, not rage, not yet, but the kind of sorrow that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. I had loved Elaine for 37 years. I had been faithful to her. I had worked every day of my life to provide for her and for Daniel. I had never raised my voice at her, never disrespected her, never made her feel small, and I had been a fool. Not because I was ignorant, but because I had trusted too completely. I called Daniel that week. I didn't tell him everything. I asked him how he was. He heard something in my voice. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing, son. I just wanted to hear your voice." He paused. "I'm coming over for dinner on Sunday. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'll be there Sunday." Daniel came for Sunday dinner, and we sat together after the meal, just the two of us, while Elaine claimed she had a headache and went upstairs. He looked at me across the table with his mother's eyes, sharp and searching, but with my patience. "Dad," he said quietly, "what is going on? I need you to trust me," I said. "Something is going to happen this week. I need you to know that whatever you hear about it, whatever people tell you afterward, your father is not a fool." Daniel stared at me. "I've never thought you were a fool." "I know, but others have." I looked at him steadily. "Will you trust me?" He nodded slowly. "Always." I reached out and put my hand over his. "You are the best thing I ever did, son. You know that." He looked at me with that expression, the one he's had since he was 8 years old, trying to be brave while his heart was breaking. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Don't be scared," I said. "Just be ready. March 14th, 7:30 in the evening." La Maison Dorée, the restaurant was beautiful. High ceilings, candlelight, white tablecloths, the soft sound of a piano somewhere in the back. The kind of place where the menus have no prices, where the waiters are young men in black jackets who refill your water glass before it's even half empty. Klaus was already seated when we arrived. He stood when he saw Elaine, stood for her the way a man stands for someone he is glad to see, and he kissed her on both cheeks. Then he turned to me, extended his hand, and gave me the firm, brief handshake of a man greeting someone he considers an inconvenience. "Harold," he said, "good to finally have dinner together. Wonderful to meet you properly," I said. My English was warm. My smile was wide. My eyes were soft and slightly glazed in the way that people expect from a simple, contented man. Klaus relaxed immediately. We sat down, Klaus at the head, Elaine to his left, me across from Elaine. A bottle of red wine appeared. The waiter poured. We clinked glasses. "To good business," Klaus said. "To good business," Elaine echoed. I raised my glass and smiled like the happiest man alive. For the first 30 minutes, the conversation was entirely in English. Work topics mostly, the contract, the logistics chain, the new European regulations. I nodded along. I asked simple questions that showed I understood very little about their world. I said things like, "Oh, that sounds complicated. And Elaine always says you're such a hard worker, Klaus." Klaus glanced at Elaine with the faintest smile. She returned it. And then, so smoothly it was almost elegant, they began slipping into German. It started with small asides, a phrase here, a comment there. The way bilingual people will sometimes switch languages mid-conversation for a word that feels better in one than the other. But I kept smiling, kept nodding, kept cutting my food politely, and looking pleasantly around the beautiful restaurant. The picture of a man who hears only music where there are words. Klaus leaned back in his chair. He swirled his wine, and in German he said to Elaine, "He really has no idea, does he?" Elaine laughed softly. In German she replied, "Not a word. He's a sweet man, really. Simple, content." Klaus said, "Simple men are useful." They shared another small smile. I put a piece of bread in my mouth and chewed thoughtfully, gazing at the piano player in the corner. Then Klaus, growing more comfortable, more confident, leaned forward slightly and said in German, "And you are certain about everything. The situation is clear. Elaine put her hand over his briefly, on the table, briefly. But I saw it, and she said quietly in German, I am certain. Everything is arranged. It will be fine. Klaus nodded, satisfied. Then he glanced at me, at my oblivious, contented, slightly nodding face, and he said in German, almost casually, almost bored, and him. He suspects nothing. Elaine looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not cruelty exactly. Something worse. Pity mixed with contempt. The way you might look at a loyal old dog who has no idea his owners are moving house without him. She picked up her wine glass. She touched her stomach with her other hand, that same gesture, soft and private, and she said in German, Don't worry. The idiot is so happy about the pregnancy. He will raise your son thinking it's his. The table fell completely silent for just a moment. Klaus exhaled slowly, something between relief and satisfaction. I reached for the wine bottle. I refilled Klaus's glass first, because I am a good host, always have been. Then Elaine's glass, then my own. I set the bottle down carefully. I looked at Klaus. I looked at Elaine. And then I spoke, in perfect German. Clear, calm, fluent, unhurried German. The German of a man who spent 18 months in Munich at the age of 21, and never forgot a single word. I said, I appreciate the wine. It's an excellent vintage. But I should tell you both. I have been speaking German since, before either of you knew each other existed. What followed was the loudest silence I have ever heard in my life. Elaine's face went white, completely white, the color draining from her cheeks so fast I watched it happen. Her wine glass stopped halfway to her lips and stayed there, suspended, trembling slightly. Klaus straightened in his chair like a man who has just been told the ground beneath him is not solid. I kept my voice calm. I continued in German, because there was no reason to stop now. You've been having this conversation in front of me for quite a while, and I've appreciated the honesty, actually. It saves us time. Elaine finally lowered her glass. Her mouth opened, no words came. Klaus found his voice first. He switched to English, a reflex, perhaps, of a man trying to regain control of a situation. Harold, please, I said gently, still in German, switching back deliberately. We can keep speaking in the language we've all been using tonight. It seems more honest. Klaus went silent. I took a sip of my wine. I set the glass down precisely on its ring mark, and I said, still calm, still quiet, I have known about your relationship with my wife for several months. I am not here tonight because I was fooled into coming. I came because I wanted to sit across from you both and understand completely what kind of people you are, and now I know. Elaine whispered in English. She couldn't help it. Harold, please, not here. Where would you prefer? I asked in English now, because I could see she needed that small mercy of her own language. At home, in front of Daniel, at the next company dinner where you explain to your colleagues why Klaus will no longer be attending. Her eyes filled. Harold, I am not going to make a scene, I said. That is not who I am, you know that. You've always known that. It was useful to you, my quietness, my steadiness, my willingness to smile and carry on. I paused. But I need you to hear me now, both of you. I looked at Klaus directly. I don't know what she has told you about me. I suspect it was a version of me that made you feel comfortable. A simple man, a content man, a man who wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight. Perhaps she believed that herself. I folded my hands on the table. But I have worked for 40 years, quietly and without complaint, to build a life and a home. I raised a son who is more decent than either of you have been tonight. And I have never, not once, humiliated anyone at a dinner table. Klaus said nothing. He was looking at the tablecloth. I will not raise your child, I said, very quietly. Not out of cruelty to an innocent baby. The child deserves nothing but love. But I will not participate in a lie. I am done with lies. I have been done with them longer than you know. I stood up. I took my jacket from the back of my chair. Enjoy your dinner, I said. The lamb here is apparently excellent. I recommend it. And I walked out. I went home. I made tea. I sat in my chair by the window. My chair, the one Daniel bought me for my 60th birthday, and I looked at the street outside. I was not calm because I felt nothing. I was calm because I had made peace with something long before that dinner. You see, the dinner was not my plan for revenge. The dinner was simply the closing of a chapter I had already decided to end. 3 weeks before the dinner, after I heard Elaine on the phone in the kitchen, I had made 2 phone calls. The first was to a solicitor, a family law specialist recommended by an old friend from the factory. In the 3 weeks that followed, quietly and without drama, I had begun the legal process of protecting myself and my interests. The second call was to my son Daniel. Not to tell him everything, not then, but to plant a seed, to say, trust me. Be ready. Now I picked up the phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. Dad, it's done, I said. A pause. Are you all right? I am. Where are you? Home in my chair. He said, I'm coming, and hung up before I could argue. He arrived 20 minutes later. He sat across from me, and I told him everything. Not in pieces, all of it. The phone call I'd overheard, the pregnancy, what Elaine said at dinner, what I said in response. Daniel is like me in many ways. He sat very still while I spoke. He didn't interrupt, but his jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his knees, tightened into fists, then deliberately opened again. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Dad, how long have you known? About 3 months, I said. And you said nothing. I needed to be certain, and I needed to decide what kind of man I wanted to be about it. He looked at me. His eyes were bright in a way that made him look very young suddenly. And the German, when did you? I didn't even know you spoke German. You never asked, I said, and I smiled for the first time that evening. He almost laughed, then stopped himself. He leaned forward and looked at me very seriously. Dad, what do you need, right now? I said, I need my son to sit with me for a while. He moved from his chair to the arm of mine, the way he used to sit beside me when he was small, and he stayed there. That was enough. Elaine came home around midnight. She had been crying. I could see it in the redness around her eyes, the way her careful makeup had been gently blotted, but not fully repaired. Daniel stood when she came in. The way he stood was not aggressive, but it was not the warm stand of a son greeting his mother, either. It was the stand of a man who is holding himself carefully. Daniel, she said, surprised. Mom, he said. The single word, the controlled steadiness of it, made her flinch. She looked at me. Harold, can we please talk, privately? Anything you say to me can be said in front of our son, I said. She sat down. For a long time she said nothing. Then, slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant it to happen. She said Klaus had been, and she stopped herself there. He was what? Daniel said. Not cruel, just asking. He was. Present, she said, quietly, in a way I had stopped expecting. I didn't take offense at that. It was the first completely honest thing she had said to me in a long time. I know I haven't been what you needed, I said. I won't argue that. I've been quiet. I've been easy to overlook. I paused, but Elaine, I was faithful. For 37 years I was faithful, and I was kind, and I was there. That matters too. She began to cry properly then, not the controlled, careful tears of a woman trying to manage a situation. Real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere you can't perform. The baby, she whispered. Harold, I don't know what, the baby is innocent, I said firmly. Whatever happens between us, that child did nothing wrong. You'll need to work out your situation with Klaus. I won't interfere with that. I looked at her steadily. But I won't be in a marriage that is a performance, not anymore. In the weeks that followed, the picture became clearer, and what became clear was not what Elaine had expected. Klaus, when faced with the reality of the situation, when the comfortable arrangement he had imagined was replaced with actual consequences, retreated. He did not retreat unkindly. He was not a monster. But he was a man with a life in Germany, with complexities of his own, and the warm fantasy of a future had not included legal conversations and public acknowledgement. He would provide for the child. He said that clearly, and to his credit, he meant it. But the great love affair that Elaine had perhaps imagined, the new life, the exciting future, looked very different in the cold daylight of reality. She called me 3 weeks later. She asked if we could meet for coffee. She sounded nothing like the woman at the dinner table. She sounded like someone much older. We met at the cafe near our old house, the one we used to walk to on Saturday mornings before everything changed. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and said, "I underestimated you. For years. I don't know when I started doing it, but I did. I waited." "That night at the restaurant," she said, "when you spoke in German." She shook her head. I felt. She stopped. "I don't have the right word." "You felt like someone who had been looking at a painting in the dark," I said. "And then someone turned on a light." She looked at me. "Yes, exactly like that. You thought I was a simple man," I said. "And in some ways, I am. I prefer simple things. I'm not ashamed of that. But simple is not the same as empty. I just never felt the need to prove what I was to people who should have already known." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. "Harold," she said quietly, "is there any way?" "No," I said gently, not harshly. Gently, not because I hate you. I don't. I think I will always love you in the way you love someone who was most of your life. But what's broken here can't be rebuilt. Not like this. She nodded slowly. She had known that before she asked. She asked anyway, I think, because she needed to hear it said honestly. "Is Daniel," she started. "Daniel is your son," I said. "He's hurt and he's angry right now, the way a good man is when his mother is hurt, and his father is hurt, and everything he thought was solid turns out to be sand. But he will find his way back to you. He always does. He's generous. He gets that from you, actually." She almost smiled at that. Almost. The divorce was handled with as much dignity as these things can be. My solicitor had done good work in those quiet weeks of preparation. I was not left with nothing. The house was dealt with fairly. I found a smaller place, a flat on a quiet street, 2 bedrooms, a little balcony where I planted tomatoes in the spring. Daniel came on weekends sometimes. We would watch old films, the way I used to watch them with his mother. He brought Sophie occasionally, and Sophie, to my surprise, was different with me now, less polished, more real. One afternoon she sat at my small kitchen table while I made tea and said, without any ceremony, "Harold, I think I never took the time to actually know you. I'm sorry for that." I put a cup of tea in front of her and said, "You're here now." She nodded. "I'm here now." That was enough. I continued going to the printing factory, not because I had to. By now, I was close to retirement, but because the routine was good for me. My colleagues there had known me for decades. To them, I was just Harold, never less, never more. Just Harold, who made good tea and always remembered birthdays, and spoke, no one there knew this, occasionally and quietly to himself in German when he thought no one was listening. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Klaus, a handwritten letter which surprised me. He wrote it in German, which surprised me more, or perhaps he knew, by then, that I would understand it. He wrote that he was sorry, not for the clinical liability, where reasoned people apologize when they've been caught. He wrote that watching how I conducted myself on the night of the dinner, and in the aftermath with steadiness, without cruelty, without public humiliation, had made him think a great deal about the kind of man he was. He said he was not sure he liked the conclusion, He said he would be a good father to his child. He promised it in writing. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. I never wrote back. I didn't need to. I want to talk to you now, not as a character in a story, as a man who has lived this. People will underestimate quiet people, not out of malice, always, sometimes just out of the very human habit of measuring worth by volume. The louder someone speaks, the smarter we assume they are. The more space someone takes up in a room, the more important we decide they must be. And quiet men, men like me, men like my father, we let it happen, not because we don't know our own worth, but because we don't need anyone else to announce it for us. The mistake Elaine made was not falling out of love with me. That can happen. Hearts are complicated, and I am not naive enough to believe that love, once given, can never shift. The mistake she made was deciding that my quietness was emptiness, that my patience was ignorance, that because I did not perform my intelligence, I must not possess any. She learned otherwise at a dinner table, over good wine, in a language she forgot I knew. My father used to say, "A quiet man is saving his words for when they matter most." That night in La Maison Dorée, my words mattered, not because they destroyed anything, not because they were vengeful or vicious. They mattered because they were true, and because I had waited until I could say them from a position of complete clarity, not from rage, not from embarrassment, not from the desperate place of a man trying to claw back dignity. I said them as a man who had never actually lost his dignity, even when others forgot to acknowledge it. There is something I want you to hold on to, whoever you are watching this, whether you are a quiet person who has been overlooked, whether you are someone who has underestimated a person who loved you steadily and without drama, whether you are a child watching your parents and learning, even now, what you will or will not accept in your own life someday. Respect is not earned by volume. It is not granted by status or education or the expensive cologne you wear into a restaurant. Respect is earned by how you treat the people who can do absolutely nothing for you. It is earned by whether you see people really see them, or whether you look through them to the next convenient thing. I was looked through for a long time, but I was never invisible. I was simply waiting for the right moment to prove it. It is summer now. The tomatoes on my balcony are doing well. Not spectacularly, a few split in the heat, but overall, well. I am pleased with them in the moderate, steady way I am pleased with most things. Daniel came yesterday. He brought his wife Sophie, and this is new, a small bundle of news that they delivered over tea at my small table. Sophie is pregnant. Their first child, my first grandchild. I put down my cup. I looked at my son, and something happened in my chest that I don't quite have words for. Something large and warm and quiet, like sunrise. "Dad," Daniel said, watching my face, "say something." "I'm going to be a grandfather," I said. "You are?" I nodded very slowly. I looked at Sophie, who was watching me with those careful eyes of hers, the ones that were learning, still learning, to be open. "Thank you," I said to her simply. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Thank you for being the kind of man worth giving this news to," she said. We sat there in my small kitchen, with the afternoon coming through the window and the tomatoes on the balcony doing their quiet, patient work. And for a long moment, nobody said anything. Sometimes the best things live in silence. My father knew that. Now I know it too. Not every quiet man is asleep. Some of us are simply listening. Some of us are waiting for exactly the right moment to speak, in the right language, at the right table, with the full weight of everything we have always known, said at last aloud. If someone in your life is quiet, if they smile and nod and make the tea and ask how you are and remember what you told them 6 months ago, don't mistake their peace for ignorance. They may know more than you imagine. They may simply be deciding when it matters enough to speak. treat people with dignity. Not because they will always find out if you don't, though sometimes, as in restaurants, over wine, in German, they will. Treat people with dignity because it is the only way to live and look at yourself honestly. To the quiet men and women watching this, you are not less. You are not invisible. You are not a fool for loving steadily and without performance. Your time will come. And when it does, speak clearly. The room will hear you. It always does. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or perhaps someone you are, please hit the subscribe button below. Every week, we bring you stories about ordinary people who carry extraordinary strength in quiet ways. You don't want to miss what's coming next. And if this one meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. They'll thank you for it. Until next time, stay steady, stay kind, and never underestimate the man who is simply listening.